In 1974, author Charles Berlitz launched a cultural sensation with the release of his book, The Bermuda Triangle, which told of a region in the Atlantic Ocean that seemed to swallow ships and airplanes whole, along with their crews. The book inspired nearly instant responses and imitations seeking to either debunk or capitalize on a concept that was both simple and freighted with meaning. On its surface, the Bermuda Triangle served as an organizing, descriptive principle, a way of talking about a group of disturbing disappearances bounded by unseen lines connecting Bermuda, Florida, and Puerto Rico. But for those of a more esoteric bent, the triangle suggested more than just a shape on a map, but hinted at a possible, unnamed, and ancient cause. Whatever the explanation, flights and cruises and people really had gone missing. The public was fascinated, if not outright scared, and a turn of phrase was popularized. To September 1984, a young man named Don Keating picks up a copy of the Newcomerstown News and reads a report of a large hairy creature seen just south of the Ohio town. His curiosity drives him to investigate.
April of 1987. What I had done was I wanted to get a small group of people together for a quote-unquote mini expedition, go out during the day, track around, see if we could find footprints, broken branches, anything that could possibly indicate something out of the ordinary had been in the area. And at night we'd go out there, just sit by our cars alongside of the road, and these were all old mining areas, so it wasn't unusual to be out there by yourself for hours at a time with nobody going by. So as a result of us wanting to go do this mini expedition, a friend of mine who was a reporter at the Times Reporter, he said, we want to go along on a daily basis and document what you encounter or what you find. I said, that's fine. On a map, you take Conesville, Newcomerstown, and Salt Fork State Park, and you connect the dots, and that forms a triangle geographical area. So with us going out there, we hadn't really thought of a nickname for this area. We just knew that there was a triangular area that had all these reports contained within it. Toward the end of our so-called mini expedition, there was a newspaper article that came out, rather extensive as a result of them coming out with us. And the headline read, "Stalking the Sasquatch Triangle." So you finally put the two and two together. Okay, well, we knew this formed something, but we just didn't use the word Sasquatch. Joe decided, well, this is like a triangular area for Sasquatch. We're stalking the Sasquatch Triangle, and that's where it came to be. Since then, in 1987, the name has been out there for people to make reference to it. That geographical location has a ton of wildlife areas for this creature to roam. Down in the Conesville area, southwestward towards Salt Fork State Park, from southern Coshocton into northern Muskingum, and into northwestern Guernsey County. There's tens of thousands of acres of forest that is concerned, as well as lakes, creeks, rivers that run through that area. And then you get up toward Newcomerstown, southern Tuscarawas, northern Guernsey counties, in an area known as Floyd Daves. There were a series of sightings and unusual incidents that took place in the summer of 1985 out there. Of course, you get over towards Salt Fork State Park, and that area speaks for itself as far as history and Sasquatch sightings and track discoveries are concerned. As far as we know, that is one geographical area in the state of Ohio that has the heaviest concentration of sightings or track discoveries. The number of sightings in that area probably numbers at least 75, if not 100 or higher, of actual sightings of the creature in that area.
Hello, I'm Shane Spencer. Been residing in Coshocton County now, going on 8 years. Really got into Bigfooting through the experience me and my sister had that when we was 9, 10, 11 years old in Richland County. It started off with us seeing something come out behind the outhouse, which was, I can best describe as like an ape, but this was more linky. It was like a reddish hair collar, maybe 3-4 inches. Like I said, we was playing in the sandbox, and this thing came out beside it there's a wood line behind the outhouse, and it was, best of my recollection at that age, it was anywhere, 7.5 feet tall. And I only judged that by the head height was as tall as the outhouse. So me and my sister experienced that. It was just standing there at the edge of the outhouse, you know, looking at us. We're right up against it. And the guy in a suit, I mean, the piercing eyes that it had, a lot of the reports of Bigfoot that they're big and, you know, wide shoulders and no neck. But this one was more like a lanky Bigfoot, sort of like a orangutan hair collar, but it was big, but it wasn't something like you see in the movies that there's something real huge. But that sort of got us into Bigfooting, and there's a backstory to that my aunt's property, which, is where we experienced the Bigfoot encounters, that they had seen something too, my grandma and my aunt, and around the property at different times. So it wasn't something, you know, that we had seen and nobody else seen. It was something that they sort of kept from us because, you know, you don't want to tell your kids or hey, there's a monster running in the backyard. But that was really got me started. Then I moved down to Coshocton, like I said, around 7-8 years ago, and met up with David Wickham, and he's been with the BFRO in the past. And I always look for Bigfoot sign, mostly tracks, like at Mohegan, and here at Woodbury when we lived up in Richland County, I would grouse hunt a lot. So I would always, you know, be looking for tracks or, you know, listening for a whoop or something like that. But David got me more into the teepee structures, the arches, you know, casting foot tracks. So, you know, I was learning, I was going to Bigfoot conferences, things like that, you know, it all piqued my interest dramatically, really. And then Coshocton County's got Woodbury Wildlife Area, which is just under 20,000 acres. Matter of fact, County Road 6 that runs through south end of, actually it'd be the southeast end of Woodbury, was called Bigfoot Alley back in the 90s, since they've had so many road crossings there. Then it was one area where Don Keating, you know, would do his investigations at. One particular area we all call Squatch Pond is where he's, you know, might have captured that white Bigfoot.
Before long, it becomes apparent that an inordinate amount of sightings are taking place in an area between Conesville to the west, Newcomerstown to the north, and Salt Fork State Park to the southeast. Whether it was a deliberate choice or a subconscious impulse to recall the work of Charles Berlitz, Keeding names the locale the Sasquatch Triangle.
December of 2018, it was a road crossing. Me and my wife was heading to Lanesburg, which is on 541, 6:30 in the evening. So in December, it's dark at 6:30. I remember it being deer gun season, so it had to be the early part of December. The speed limit on 541 is 55 mile an hour, but we're doing 45, because there was just so many deer along the side of the road. You know, I thought one was going to jump out in front of us at any time. We're driving along, just as we get to the Knox County line, this creature, bipedal creature, ran across the road. Another second, we would have hit it. I mean, it was, and I can say this, that it wasn't a guy in a ghillie suit, because this thing was huge. I mean, you could take Hulk Hogan and put him in a ghillie suit and bulk him up, and he still wouldn't compare to this. And my wife looked at me, and as I'm driving, and said, "Did you see that?" I said, "Well, yeah, we about hit it." We had our brights on. It was no more than like 30 feet from the car. Like I said, another second, we would have totaled our car. I mean, it was, and why it ran out then and didn't wait, it just booked across the road. The best description I can give you, I don't know the color. It was dark. I had my brights on it, but it was a dark color. I mean, the shoulders it was just huge. I mean, it's nothing that you wouldn't think would be on this earth, and how they stay hid, I'm still in amazement of that for them being so big. But that was the one encounter that I had in 2018, me and my wife, and she always thought I was crazy going out Bigfooting and looking for tracks and in the woods until she actually seen this. So now she's convinced, you know, once you see one with your own eyes, I mean, it's hard to deny that they do exist. So, but I can't tell you how many steps it went across the road. It all happened so fast, but it was 30 feet in front of us in the bright lights of the car. So I can tell you that it didn't look like it had a neck, a cone head on it. Its arms were as massive as legs. If I had to guess at the weight, you take a silverback gorilla and times it by 2, and that's what I would guess the weight of it to be. It was just huge. But yeah, my wife is convinced now that Bigfoots exist.
I have to give hats off to the gentleman who established it, Don Keating. When I was growing up, loved In Search of Leonard Nimoy, Mystery Monsters. Anything to deal with Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monsters, UFOs, ghosts. And besides watching TV, the one thing I heard growing up in Senecaville in Guernsey County was there was this guy in Newcomerstown named Don Keating who had a Bigfoot meeting every once in a while, and then later on a Bigfoot conference. And I would say, hey, Dad, I want to go see this. I want to go to this Bigfoot. And Dad's like, nah, you know, it's just hogwash. We're not going to go do that. And we're not going to go there. It's just a waste of time. And you go, 20, 30 years later, and I've gotten to meet Don. And he was the one that established the Sasquatch Triangle. He was doing research when research wasn't cool. There wasn't a lot of money being thrown that way and a lot of respect. Don Keating put Ohio Bigfoot on the map when everybody else thought it was only available out west. And he did a lot of ground thumping, talking to sheriffs, talking to witnesses, and created all these reports. And he started looking at the map, and when he started putting dots on the line, he started seeing there was this area that formed a triangle, and he coined the phrase Sasquatch Triangle.
Do you know anything about the Sasquatch Triangle here in it's Ohio, right? Yeah.
Yes, I actually Jamie's would know more about that than me, and probably Tina, I'm sure.
That's okay. What's your loose knowledge on it that you know about?
Well, again, I would say with like the Bigfoot Triangle that it might be correlated with ley lines or energy lines. That would make sense to me.
What is the Bigfoot Triangle? Do you know the areas?
I don't. I'm sorry.
That's okay. You're totally fine.
The area comprising the Sasquatch Triangle is in many ways a microcosm of Ohio's natural lands. Watersheds, swamps, and creeks abound. Agriculture and development have clear-cut large tracts of the countryside, while in places like Salt Fork, second-growth forest gives the impression of a mature habitat. Ridges and ravines give witness that the Appalachian foothills are at hand, a landscape primed to support life. The question remains, does it support life on the scale of Sasquatch?
The Sasquatch Triangle is an area here in eastern and southeast Ohio that includes parts of Tuscaroras, Coshocton, Muskingum, and Guernsey County, where we're at. The unique thing about that area is most of it is heavily forested now. There was a lot of historic disturbance there. There were things like strip mines, and there were things like deep mines, which, in my opinion, the areas that have deep mines, that's potential habitat for something that could, that would maybe dwell in a cave system, kind of artificial caves. So we have a lot of historic disturbance in this area, but now it is all very heavily forested and it's always been rugged. Sometimes when people picture Ohio, they picture it all flat. They're thinking of the western part of the state. Over here, we're actually in Appalachia. If you look at a map of the Appalachian mountain range, we're in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. These hills, this hill that I'm standing on, they were formed when the Appalachian Mountains were formed. So we're in Appalachia. This area is much more like the rugged parts of West Virginia and Pennsylvania than it is the western part of Ohio. So Coshocton, Guernsey, Tuscaroras, and Muskingum counties are all in that area where it's rich with flowing water, There's plenty of habitat. It's heavily wooded, and there's also interspersed agriculture. So there are things like cornfields and things like that. So those are all things that, to me, are very wildlife friendly. So if we're looking at, say, a large bipedal undiscovered primate, this area is kind of the sweet spot in Ohio where the forests have regenerated enough to allow for it to survive, but also there's a lot of man-made habitat too, things like deep mines.
And some of those areas are good areas for Bigfoot, but I think it's the combination of that there's just enough water in that area, meaning a waterway or lakes or streams, rivers, whatever it happens to be, and just enough cover that it can hold these animals. A large part of Ohio is more agriculture, when you're in more of the central or western part of the state. It doesn't mean that there couldn't be Bigfoot around. It means that, it's less likely that we would probably see them. So having a triangle or something like that goes back historically decades, they had one of the earliest Bigfoot researchers doing in that area. And so I'm sure that he made people more aware with things that he was publishing and having meetings. He had a pamphlet, he had a newsletter that went out, and so I think a lot of the residents were probably more familiar with it, whereas if you were in another part of the state, say Dayton, while there's area around Dayton, it certainly wasn't as popular, or certainly wouldn't be as many animals there.
So what is it about the Triangle area on that part of Ohio that makes it more of a prime area for Sasquatch activity than like the western side of the state?
Well, you have hills that make it so that not everything can be plowed. These hidden little valleys that when the glaciers went through, carved niches and different things for the animals to be able to hide in. It's just the perfect combination. When you get farther south in there's not as many people, not as much agriculture, so there's probably more Bigfoot, but they're not as readily we can't see them as easily.
I think it's a great way to map out a specific area that's had activity. It kind of gives people a reference point, something to talk about. I think it was a very well-researched area at the time, especially, Don Keating and all the work that he had done on it. And of course, that Triangle area has had a lot of reports. Do I think that there were more reports in the Triangle than there were in other parts of Ohio? I don't know. I think there's a lot of Sasquatches on especially the eastern part of the state, north and south. But it was a good starting point, especially for the time period when people, especially out west, didn't think that there were Bigfoots in Ohio. And so I do have to give Don Keating a ton of credit for starting all that and making people realize, even the Four Horsemen, it's like, there's no Bigfoots in Ohio. Well, yes, there are. And all the reports started in the Triangle area, so.
I don't know if it's luck that there's more traffic or just more in that area for people to see. You have to have a human and a Bigfoot for there to be a sighting, or if there's something else going on, but you hear about that. Obviously the Ohio Sasquatch Triangle, but there are other smaller triangles around Ohio and around the whole, United States where you could always put that on the map. I'm not sure that I think it is. I think that the researchers just happened to live there. And so they were talking to people around that area. Like I remember when we were talking about, do I know any stories around here? And I didn't really have any because that's not where I go. I think you have probably as many stories, maybe not published stories, but in Columbiana County, down in Adams County, but it's just not where those people that were originally interested in Bigfoot were talking to other people. But that being said, there is a lot of water, a lot of forest, a lot of country like this, farmland, so different places that a creature would be able to be sustained with food. So that's just the kind of easy answer, I guess.
What are your thoughts on the idea of a triangle area being like a place where there's a lot of sightings? The idea of a triangle area in general.
I think it's possible, but then I want to wonder why. Why in that particular area? Is it because it's become known for that? So is it because of him? The people have just stuck with it and it's gained popularity? Possibly. I don't know if it's particularly because there's a lot of sightings. I think it just has to do with maybe that word of mouth thing.
Have you ever researched in the area of the Triangle?
I've been to Salt Fork, probably 2 or 3 times. I've never seen or heard anything yet. I have talked to several people that have said they've, either seen or they've heard sounds. Usually those were only other researchers from the area.
What is it about Salt Fork area? What is it about that area that would make it a good place for Sasquatch activity?
The amount of area that's protected, and I think the water source. But I've always wondered why they would be there. I mean, because it's in terms of time, it's actually a fairly new area. You know, the lake was, I think, formed in what, the mid to late 50s or something like that. So they may have been there, and there's plenty of cave systems or whatever you want to say that they could hide, or so maybe that's why.
I think that Bigfoot is not only with food, but with just where they are, they're opportunistic in general. For instance, Ohio is really clear cut to make a lot of the land. We have more forest now than we did 100 years ago in Ohio. Take, for instance, a clear cut usually doesn't really produce food for about 10 or 12 years, but it really produces cover. So I think a lot of times in a place like Ohio where you have a lack of cover, that you'll see Bigfoot using places like these thick right-of-ways that haven't been mowed or treated yet, or these clear cuts, and are using those just for cover. So you have those areas interspersed with agricultural fields, thick areas that you can't see very far when the leaves are off at all, and just enough movement in a terrain, meaning dips and valleys, that something can stay hidden.
I will always remember the first time that I laid eyes on southeast Ohio. I was coming down from the northwest and traveling down from the northwest through Columbus and then heading east. And everything up to that point had been farmland, just flat, cultivated areas, family farms, and just as far as the eye could see, cornfields and bean fields and so forth. It only took about 20 or 30 minutes east of Columbus, Ohio, to see a rapid change in the topography. The road started to roll. There started to be no longer so many fields and farms. Now there was more forest and wood lines. And it started to undulate in just a way that became very picturesque. And only later did I learn that what I was entering was actually foothill area of the Appalachian range. And so with all of that, you also get creeks, you get rivers, streams, some waterfalls as well. It in every way changed my perception, changes your perception of Ohio in general. If you're only used to the Toledo and the northwest quadrant, then you think it's all flat like this, but not at all. And it really does begin to mimic what you see on a much grander scale the further you get into the mountain range.
Yes, if you go back into the natives, they would have had their triangle areas. The natives talked a lot about the Bigfoot, so I think that that's a possibility. The Cuyahoga Valley, there you go, you're getting back into those state and national parks, those larger wooded areas.
That whole area encompasses a lot of acreage. I mean, I think it's a very good possibility that they move through those areas in general. I definitely have had experience in Coshocton, Salt Fork, obviously. I haven't had any encounters with anything like somebody saying, "Oh, I saw a white one specifically," because that's kind of what they talk about out there in Coshocton a lot. And he said that he did see a gray one, and he said it was gray like when someone's hair starts to turn gray, like it's white but has the gray highlights. And he saw that there at Woodbury apparently, and I thought that was pretty cool because I've never seen one. I'd love to see something like that too, like just white in general. Like I said, I kind of wonder why. I don't think it's old age. Some people do, but I don't think that's what it is. Basically, it's very, very dense. If you go, especially in like July and things like that, it's very hard to move through. Rolling hills, you do need sometimes not like rappelling gear and stuff, but there are times where you need to really watch what you're doing. Sometimes a rope does come in handy to get down places. It depends. Like Woodbury is very wooded, but there's a lot of flat land out that way too. It just depends where you go. There's a lot of waterways. Fairly confident saying that's what they're actually using for traveling. It just makes sense to me. But if you just imagine a typical, I want to say holler, that's what I'm thinking in my head. That's a country thing, like it's a hill down into a valley kind of thing, and it's usually very lush. It has, the soil here is more acidic, I know that. Yeah, that's about it. I've seen some stuff, like videos and TV where people go out in the middle of nowhere, and that's kind of what I think they do. But I do think that they do come in sometimes, like I said, in cases like the dumpsters and things like that. But it's still in a very rural area. You know, it's not going to be just in the city, you know what I mean, kind of thing, or even the outskirts, something like that. They have to be able to hide, and that's why I think they love the triangle area, because there's also caves. That's the one thing I've noticed is I've found small cave systems, nothing like huge, but there's a few, you know, like there's actually a really nice cave area that I found in Salt Fork where a lot of people don't go.
I believe that totally. More remote in that area. Also, there's like a greenway that comes down from Lake Erie that goes down to the Ohio River that they could be on that, and that would include the triangle. There's so much forestry there, little towns and a lot of creeks, rivers, and there's a lot of wildlife, especially if you get to the Wayne National Forest. It's just really thick forest down there.
I think generally outsiders or out-of-staters don't see Ohio as that way, but
No.
it's very much that way here in
Mhm.
eastern Ohio,
Yes.
southeastern Ohio.
In the mountains and the hills.
Right. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, down the Beaver Creek area, we're right on the edge of the Appalachians, and there are a lot of hills. There were a lot of mines in that area, a lot of caves possibly, and the water source. And I think that could be prime for having a large primate type animal there.
As a research area, the Sasquatch Triangle is somewhat unique in terms of accessibility, whereas entry to other Bigfoot territory often necessitates prolonged and difficult travel. This part of Ohio is easily visited by automobile, supported by major expressways running north and south, from Cleveland through Cambridge down to Marietta, and east to west connecting Columbus to Indianapolis and Wheeling, West Virginia. Within the triangle, there are certainly places that are far from city lights, but reaching those places is an uncomplicated task, allowing just about anyone with an interest the opportunity to set foot on land where mysteries have also tread.
Yeah, I had set up my blind. Like I said, I walked back here real quiet. I believe it was right here. Yeah, it was right here, and I was being real quiet here, just, you know, tying in the blind, and right in through there, I had heard that's what drew my attention, was a big snap sound, and that's where I seen the arms sort of stretched out like this, and I could see portions of its body, and it was tall. And like I said, I couldn't see the whole thing. It wasn't with the foliage, but it just pushed the tree right over and just kept right on walking. And as it's walking, I could see bits and pieces. I could see all of its legs and all of its upper body due to the foliage. Didn't smell nothing, didn't hear nothing afterwards until I went over there looking for tracks, but the ground wasn't conducive for tracks at all. Then as I walked this bottom here, something jumped up in front of me and started busting through the brush, and this has probably been 15 minutes after I had my sighting, because by the time I sat here for 10, walked down there, looked for tracks, yeah, 15, 20 minutes. It could have been a deer that busted up, or it could have been, you know, what I had saw. I don't know, but that's what happened here.
But what actually really attracted me to it was in 1987, I think it was, a fellow by the name of Matt Heston had been cruising along County Road 410. Up on the side of a hill where a small mobile home was located, there was a storage building, a red storage building. And on the side of that red storage building that everybody could see as they drove along was a giant white footprint, and someone had taken the time and the effort to paint on it Sasquatch Valley. So as a result of that, we thought, well, there's got to be something behind this. Maybe the guy knows something. So we decided to start going out into that area and doing research. I approached the guy once or twice, actually once, because he was about as cold to me as an iceberg. He had no inkling whatsoever to give me any information that he knew. He wouldn't even tell me the time of day if I had to depend my life on it. Why did you paint the barn in Sasquatch Valley? We just wanted to paint it on there. That was it. He had nothing else to say. However, another guy walked up to him. He was as welcome to him as an old friend. Back to the original question, I would say one of the reasons you would go out there was just to take a look at the area, see how wild it is. It really is. And You never know what you could see. I've actually videotaped something on a high wall from 1.5 miles away as the crow flies on one of those high walls back in September, I believe it was 1995. So there's something out there, at least there was.
I think that Bigfoot is not only with food, but with just where they are, they're opportunistic in general. For instance, Ohio is really clear cut to make a lot of the land. We have more forests now than we did 100 years ago in Ohio. Take, for instance, a clear cut usually doesn't really produce food for about 10 or 12 years, but it really produces cover. So I think a lot of times in a place like Ohio where you have a lack of cover, that you'll see Bigfoot using places like these thick right-of-ways that haven't been mowed or treated yet, or these clear cuts, and are using those just for cover. So you have those areas interspersed with agricultural fields, thick areas that you can't see very far when the leaves are off at all, and just enough movement in a terrain, meaning dips and valleys, that something can stay hidden.
July of 2022, around 10 a.m., I was on what I call a Bigfoot recon at Woodbury Wildlife Area, where I got my camera out. It was a light mist and rain, so there wasn't nobody out that day. It was a weekday also. And I'm back in off the main road, the state route, maybe it's like a mile back to this dead end lane. So I proceed back to the, probably a half mile back. I cross a dam at a pond and another pond on back there, probably another close to a half a mile. And I'm just being real quiet. I'm on like an old gas line road, and I'm just walking real quiet, filming, and I'm looking and say, there's some berries, potential Bigfoot food. You know, I'm just being real quiet and got my camera filming some things. And I'm sure everybody's got a sixth sense, because I felt like something was watching me, and I actually set it on camera. So it sort of looks staged because, hey, if something's watching me, then yeah, there it is. It's sort of like when you're sitting at a red light and you feel like somebody's watching and you look over and somebody's looking at you. That's the kind of feeling. It wasn't a creeped out, spooked feeling. I just had the feeling that something was watching me, and I turned around towards the pond, and there was this black figure, sort of 3/4 the way standing up, just standing there. And we met eye-to-eye contact, and it was a good ways off. I'm gonna guess 125 yards. I think we had actually went there one time with the rangefinder, and it turned out to be right about that distance. It's sort of like this: if you see a doe at 125 yards, you know it's a doe. If you see a buck, you can see the antlers. So I didn't see a lot of detail, but what I did see, once we made eye contact, it took off running on all fours. And I could rule out a bear very easily, because when it ran, it didn't run like this. It actually went like this, running up the diagonal of the hill. And from what I can recall, there was probably, and I actually set a trail cam back up there for 4 months this year, which I didn't get nothing but deer on it. What I actually saw was it running diagonal up the hill, probably 30 yards. I got to see it really, really good run up the hill. And that's how I seen this motion here. And that one too, when we ran all fours, reminded me of a gorilla at the zoo. It was, I mean, just bulky. Like a bear has got a straight line when it's, you know, from its head. Its head's really not above its neck when it's running, maybe a little, but this thing had its head up above its back. I mean, it just looked like a gorilla. It was huge. I can't say how big, but it was, from that distance, it looked really, really big. So after I calmed down for about 10 minutes, I was by myself. I said, I need to get on the other side of that pond. And this is not a manicure pond. It's briars and brambles and had little dips and gullies in it, so it's not an easy walk. And I had never been to that backside of the pond, so it took me 15, 20 minutes to get there and start looking for tracks. And what I found was like impressions about this big on the ground where the moss was pulled back, like that motion that I had seen, and I was tracking it up the side of the hill where I seen it. I lost this photo. I had one of them phones with the built-in SD card. My phone blacked out, but it was a 16-inch print with toes in it coming in the other way. So what this thing had done, it came in this way, it was down here at the pond, it seen me, and it ran back out the way that it came in. And I've got the most musty sulfur smell. I mean, it just come to me. I mean, didn't make your eyes water, but it was a strong smell. And the wind, I checked the wind was blowing right towards me, so I knew it was in front of me, so I had to double back to where I was standing and first seen my sighting. So I thought about this afterwards, and I thought, you know, like if somebody comes to my house and I don't know, and I see them in my backyard, I'm gonna keep an eye on them. I'm gonna know where they're at. And I believe that's what he was doing with me, because 45 minutes had passed and all of a sudden I'm getting this smell. So I'm following the smell, and I circle back to the gas line thing, and just before that, there was a skid mark, probably on the side of the hill where something, it wasn't a deer skid mark because it was probably 4 or 5 inches wide, maybe 2 feet long, where something had slid down that hill. It was all fresh, you know, the ground had just been turned up. And that's the way the smell was coming. So it only makes sense that that's the way that it went. Thinking on that, you know, looking back, I was being really quiet. I know it's 1 in a million chance that I was even going to see a Bigfoot. I was mainly looking for, you know, evidence, and I just enjoy nature, getting out on hikes and taking the mushrooms in, the different type of trees, the creek. But yeah, he surprised me and I surprised him. The wind was in my favor and everything worked out where I actually got to see that Bigfoot. And like I said, set a trail camera up for 4 months. We didn't catch nothing, but you know, there again, some say they avoid the trail cams due to the IR light, and I tend to agree with that. With the millions of cameras out, you think we'd have more Bigfoot photos. There is a lot of that look legit, but there again, there's a lot that are hoax too. So it's that was that sighting. I've been there multiple times, haven't had anything else.
Well, my thoughts on a triangle area describing like a cluster of Bigfoot reports or anything, I think is a human construct, rather obviously. It has antecedents, you know, very famously as the Bermuda Triangle, Bridgewater Triangle, and so forth. Perhaps that sounds better than saying the Sasquatch Oval or the Bigfoot trapezoid, right? I mean, it's different. But what it's describing is a grouping of sighting reports in a general geographical area, and it helps us to think of those things. What's so interesting to me is that when you bring triangles and pyramids into things that can have some occult underpinnings that I think a lot of your flesh and blood Bigfoot researchers would be very uncomfortable with and would rather distance themselves from, but no one really thinks of it in those terms. It's just a handy way of talking about, you know, in this area, where do most of the sighting reports happen? I think you have in the Sasquatch Triangle some areas or microclimates that would mimic the sort of temperate rainforest that a Bigfoot seems to be interested in, which is to say you have ridges and hollers and shady forests. You have multiple creeks, watersheds, rivers, and lakes, many of which are man-made, but still lakes that would be able to provide water and foodborne creatures for them to eat. Along with that, you know, from a human standpoint, not a great density in population. You know, the points on the Sasquatch Triangle, only one of those is a town. The rest are simply areas, one of which would be the general area of Salt Fork State Park, and the other area somewhere over in Wills Creek, which it's not that no one lives there, but the homes are spread apart from one another. In many cases, they're cabins or vacation getaways rather than full-time residences. So you have this area that seems to be in many cases undeveloped or protected by being wildlife areas or state parks, in the case of Salt Fork, which would set up ideally for that being an area that Sasquatch may be encountered.
What is it about the triangle that makes it a prime area for Sasquatch activity?
Water. Water, and you have Salt Fork State Park that monitors it. Just like I previously mentioned, the Woodbury Wildlife Area, which is about 17,000 acres. Between the two, you're looking over 40,000 acres. Within the triangle, you have Glendenning, Tappan Lake, and different lakes, even up to Atwood, so you're offering a lot of different water sources, creeks and rivers that connect all of those different things. Besides that, you have farmlands, so that During the summer, if a pumpkin goes missing in the fall, you won't notice a pumpkin. They'll sit there and say the deer ate the corn, or if the livestock goes away, something like that, then it just happens. Or the other thing would be bags of feed. I've taken reports where they've seen these animals carrying bags of feed. Besides that is the deer. The deer is plentiful in Ohio, as we all know, and there's 1 million of them in those areas.
October 2022. Okay, and what happened, it was on my property here. October is the time when actually September, when you're getting ready for your deer hunting. You're setting up your tree stands, you're setting your blinds, you've got your cameras out. So it's an active time for deer hunters with bow season coming in at the end of September. So I drove my quad back. We got it's probably half a mile back to the back part of the woods, and I had to cross a little creek and go up the hill and set a blind up, a deer blind. I just took my time. I walked up the hill probably 200 yards from where I parked, and I was just being real quiet. I said, well, maybe I'll see a Bigfoot. Wasn't even on my mind. And probably a half hour went by, and I'm setting up the blind, tying up the wind-resistant ropes to the tree so the blind don't blow over when the wind comes. And so I'm just being super quiet, and it was a nice, beautiful day, no wind, and all of a sudden I hear a crash sound. And I've seen plenty of trees on a calm day, no wind, fall over. You know, it don't take a wind. I've been sitting on the porch here and I've heard trees come down on a perfectly calm day. But it drew my attention. And this is probably one ridge to the creek to the next ridge. I'm going to say that's a distance of 75 yards, I'm guessing. So I heard this crack. Like I said, I was being real quiet, and head went right, if you hear a sound, your eyes going to go right towards that sound. And I seen this outstretched arm that looked jet black. This is about 75 yards. And keep in mind, it's from one ridge to another, but there's a lot of big trees back there, so the foliage is not real heavy. So I could see like part of a leg, its head, its shoulder, then the tree went over. And I'm like in disbelief watching this thing walk like I'm here. Here's the creek, and it's walking this ridge. And I'm not seeing the full thing at any time. I'm just seeing bits and pieces of its legs moving, its head, it's swaying, and I'm just in amazement. So I'm sitting there, and I lost sight of it. There's some brush on top of that ridge that it went to, and I waited about 10 or 15 minutes, and I said, well, I'll go look for tracks, but I knew this time of year, everything's dry on that ridge. I never usually find tracks on high ground. You're going to find your tracks in the swampy, boggy, wet areas. Went up there anyway, and I started in the direction where I had last seen it at, then something jumped up in front of me. I can't say it, I didn't see it, I just heard it busting through the brush. I can't say whether it was a deer or that bipedal creature that I seen. I don't know what it was. But another thing that sort of adds emphasis to this is my grandson, my son-in-law, and I deer hunt back to the property. And we had all rode our quads to the top of the hill because it's a really big hill up there. Then we hunt the back side of the property. So we usually get up there early. We cross that creek at the back where then my daughter set up, my grandson. So we're sort of spaced out like 100, 150 yards, hunting this ridge, like a family hunt. Get a text from my son-in-law, did you hear that? And I said, no, what was it? He said it was heavy breathing. And he said, then like some chimpanzee or orangutan noises. He said, I don't know what it was. And Tony's been hunting all his life. He butchers his own deer, they process it. So he knows what the sounds of the woods are. But I didn't hear it, my daughter and grandson didn't hear it. We all met back at the bridge just, right at dark, because you can't see the hunt deer anymore. And man, the most musty, dead, sulfur-like smell, we all smelled it, and it was super strong right at that bridge. And it wasn't a dead animal, because when we crossed the bridge, nobody smelled it. So that was one incident. Another incident, we didn't actually see anything, but that's what he said. He could hear it like breathing. He said it was, and he knows what deer sound like, snorting and huffing and stuff like that. So Could it have been a bear? From what I've researched on black bear, they've got a scent gland on their neck, and it's usually a springtime for mating season. So, you know, can bears smell? I guess if they roll in something dead, but this was more not like a dead animal smell. It was something different. That would have been last year around June. And we had set up our, our night investigation. We had our glow balloon up for the orb imitation. We had pheromones out, which we use. We had our night vision. And I usually put up some tuna or make bait traps, just sort of like hunting wild animals. You use bait to draw them in or sound. And most of the time I use bait, sardines, fish, chicken, just whatever. We was sitting there and, we're just scanning. We never use white flashlights. We always use red or green, most of the time red, because I found out that, Bigfoot's serenity, his peace is in the dark. If you're shining a bright white light on something, then, he's not going to come in, especially if you're wanting to get footage for your thermal or your night vision. And we found the red is easier on our eyes, and then you can see a possum or a coon put a white light on, he's going to run off. But you put a red light and he'll stay right there. So that's one of our guidelines that we go by as a group, is just using red flashlights only. It was a pretty good spot for night vision and thermal. And I'm seeing eye shine without a flashlight. And I'm telling Josh, I said, Josh, I've got eye shine over here. And there's a lot of deer in Woodbury, but when the grass is 4 and 5 feet high and the eye shine is a foot or two above that, then you can rule out a deer unless he's walking on 2 legs. And Josh yells over at me, I've got eye shine over here. So we're like having eye shine on both sides of us. And I can best describe it as yellow, big yellow eyes, and there's no tree. I know owls have got yellow eye shine, but there's no trees right there for an owl to be in to, have the eye shine. And all of a sudden, we hear the most loudest growl up behind us towards the woods, 75 yards. And that's at the most. And it was just like, we both jumped. We looked at each other and said, a lot of times when you hear noises when you're out with a group, you said, did you hear that? We didn't have to say that. We both plainly heard it. So we're looking, we got our night vision on, by the time you turn your night vision on, push the button, get ready, we're not getting anything. But we know we just heard a big roar. Then there's a gate up there at the entrance to this area at Woodbury Wildlife Area. And all of a sudden we hear this gate, just something smacked the tar out of the gate. It rattled the chain on the gate. Now we're really nervous. I told Josh, I said, let's set our chairs back to back. That way you can watch this way and I can watch that way. We didn't want to leave because like I told Josh, I said, we're here for Bigfoot. I said, now's not the time to leave. We're scared, nervous, but if we're going to get any video proof, I said, we got to stick it out. So as the night went on, it sort of just deadened out. I don't know if we was interrupting their coming into that field to feed, or juveniles was around us, and the alpha or the mother screamed at us, hey, there's humans down. I don't know what happened, but there was eye shine on both sides, and behind us was the one to scream. It was a growl. And someone could say, well, that might have been a bear, but it smacked the gate. So me and Mike Hartman went back the next day, and he's got photos of actually what looked like a handprint, oily handprint on the gate, like the round bars. So it was very convincing because it had like big fingers and spaces. So, and we was in a pretty remote area, there was nobody around. If somebody drove down through that area, there's no houses on the road. You would hear them, nobody's sneaking in on you. So yeah, that was one night that, that had our hair on the back of our neck for sure.
The Sasquatch Triangle has a reputation as the location in Ohio with the highest concentration of Bigfoot sightings in the state. But is that reputation well-deserved?
I would say that's the hotspot as far as the density of sightings and tracks are concerned in one geographical area. Other areas that I could think of offhand would be the Minerva area, when you had the Minerva monster back in the late 70s, early 80s. Rome, Ohio, in the far northeast corner of the state in Ashtabula County. Back in 1981, they had a large number of sightings that took place. Unfortunately, Dennis Felic just passed away not long ago. He was the main investigator. If he was alive and if he would talk to you, those are reports that I just wish I would have had a recorder, an audio recorder recording him as he was telling myself about all this stuff. But anyway, northeast Ohio near Rome, Ohio would be another area. South central Ohio in Vinton County near MacArthur was a hotbed of activity, again in the late 70s into the early 80s. So there are several locations in Ohio that have had a number of sightings and track discoveries take place within a certain time frame.
There are other areas in Ohio, surprisingly, besides the Sasquatch Triangle, that seem to be so-called hotspots or where reports are clustered. One of those would be the Wayne National Forest, which is actually not one continuous forest, but it's a large area comprised of 3 units. Athens is one of those units in Logan County. Also, Marietta has their own unit, and there's an Ironton unit even further south. And what the Ironton and the Marietta units have in common is the Ohio River. So you have sort of, once again, the recipe that you would need in Ohio. You know, have a reasonable expectation that sightings would be possible. You have a water source, a water travelway, and you have dense forest. Also, going back up the Ohio River, you run into Columbiana County, which historically has also been a place where people have had sightings and interactions. That Ohio Howl recording was obtained in Columbiana County. And what that has in common with the other areas is rolling terrain, ridges, valleys, and waterways. Then again, a kind of underrated, some clusters of reports is Ashtabula County. But you do have the Grand River watershed there. You have lots of farmland abutting forests as well. Sightings that come out of the Geneva area almost on an annual basis. Very, you know, at first blush, a very strange place for a Bigfoot sighting to take place, because you're virtually on the doorstep of Lake Erie. And you just wouldn't think that that would be a place that Bigfoot would be ever seen, but it has been repeatedly, close counter type sightings of the creature. And again, in all of those situations, what you have got are water, adequate place to travel, place to hide, and food sources.
When we had access to Minerva, that was still hot. You know, everyone knows the Minerva monster, but that was still a very active area when we were there. Like I said, the only reason we don't go there is because we lost access to it because it got deemed wetlands. So from the state. Mohican was kind of hot last year a little bit for me, but it's bizarre how it works. Like, I think they come through maybe every few years, not like all the time. But when they're there, you can find tracks. The only thing I haven't found is like hair samples or anything, but you can find tracks there. There's just so much. There's sightings. I mean, I've had, like, when it's hot, I've had reports like of crossing roads and things like that, but I can even tell you sort of where that one is, and everyone will think it's one place anyway, but it's if you've heard about by Spencer area, there's a huge park out there too. I've had people who live around there call and say, hey, we've had something come through, you know, this sort of thing. Go out, look for tracks, then, you know, sometimes you find them, sometimes you don't. The biggest we've actually had there, and I have pictures of that one, I didn't actually cast it because it was in the snow, but it was from that area. We actually did have, they were 18 inches. And we got there, it was just starting to snow, and we went down, turned around, came back to park. You know, we always go down by the water and look there first. And we came back to park, and there were actually a trackway that wasn't there when we came in. So we wound up documenting it, taking pictures, measurements, everything we could. It's just there was no way really to cast it, you know. So, but there was 6-foot steps, you stride in between each step. And we were sitting there trying to get pictures and document everything, and it started snowing harder and harder and started filling everything in, so we had to do everything really quick. But that's that same area, and that's northwest Ohio. So that's not even down in the valleys and hollers, and, you know, I don't know why they come through there, but they do.
Anecdotally, it's hard to argue with numerous books, television shows, and websites telling the triangle's tales of large ape-like figures in the forest. But one wonders, at what point do the preponderance of reports feed into self-fulfilling prophecy, conditioning witnesses to attribute every sound and shadow to Sasquatch? Or are there simply more Sasquatch in places like Salt Fork with more humans ready to see them? While the Triangle seems to hold the title as Ohio's Bigfoot capital, there may be other regions quietly building their own monstrous resume.
Well, the Sasquatch Triangle in Ohio, that term has been used for years and years, and there were a lot of reports coming out of that triangle. I think it's actually expanded more beyond the borders of the triangle, but the whole eastern half of Ohio has numerous reports from Lake Erie clear down to the Ohio River. The western part of the state is so much flatter, and you don't have all the hills and the heavily forested area. You know, it's all crop ground, or there's cornfields and soybeans with very little forested area. I have taken a few reports from western Ohio, but nothing like the eastern part. I actually live just south of what's called the Triangle, and as I said, I've taken many reports from that area as well.
Are you aware of any other areas in Ohio outside of the original Triangle that are as densely populated with sightings, like other hotspots in Ohio, so to speak?
Yeah, I've taken a lot of reports clear up in Ashtabula County, which is clear up on the lake. Hocking Hills area, where Old Man's Cave is. Several reports. A lot of people are renting cabins and chalets and cottages, and they're putting stuff out. They're putting food out and stuff, and I think these creatures are starting to get a habit of coming around and taking these offerings, because I've had emails from people saying they've heard noises at night, and they've smelled very stinky odors, and they've heard something walking on the deck or back porch of the cabin. A lot of them are, exchanging information on coaxing these creatures to get in closer to take their offering. But I think you want to be very careful before you start a pattern like that.
On balance, we human beings crave order and stability. To that end, we observe and recognize patterns in the world around us. At times, we may impose patterns upon the world we observe as we attempt to predict or simply understand a reality that sometimes defies such efforts. Reports of Sasquatch in a given area may fit into a triangle that we overlay on a map, but the movement of such an entity is hardly limited by that kind of border. Nevertheless, there would be no triangle to speak of were it not for extraordinary things being encountered. There would be no need to organize unusual sightings in a way we can understand if they were not taking place. As Don Keating writes, "All I know is that I have seen something, and I know there is some sort of bipedal creature roaming the forest of eastern Ohio." Keeding is not alone in claiming that this knowledge became his in Ohio's Sasquatch Triangle.